On a quiet Pennsylvania road, I treated a splintered hand and met the Amish man who changed my life. His name was Eli. His voice was steady. His kindness was gentle. And when we parted, a part of me stayed behind among the fields and lantern light, forever, waiting softly. If this gentle, honest love story touches you, please subscribe, share, and breathe with me through every tender moment today. I'm Dr. Daniel Reed, and I tell this story with the same care I use when I wash my hands before touching a patient. I tell it softly because it lives in a quiet place inside me. The first time I saw Eli Yoder, I was on a 2-lane road outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The fall corn was tall. A breeze was skating across the fields like a hand smoothing a coverlet, and a buggy in the distance moved with a steady rhythm that made me slow my breathing without thinking about it. I was there to help at a small clinic for a few days, to cover for an overworked colleague who needed time off. I was there to chart carefully, to listen, to dose antibiotics, to check ears and knees and pulses. Love was not on the schedule. I found him at a farm where a barn raising was underway, beams like giant ribs lifted by men whose hands told the story of wood and soil. Someone had sent word that a man had driven a splinter into his palm. There are splinters, and then there are splinters. This one had buried itself deep like a secret. I parked down the lane and walked in, my bag bumping against my leg, the smell of cut pine and damp earth greeting me like an old hymn. He stepped forward when they called my name. "Eli," one of the older men said, pointing with his chin, "won't quit to wash it. Maybe you can give him a reason." Eli laughed softly at that, a quiet, warm sound that made me think of small lamps and baked bread. He was tall in the way that looks like quiet strength, rather than a challenge, with straw in his hair and a patience in his eyes that I would later understand had been trained by years of chores at dawn. He held out his hand to me without bravado, a palm nicked by work, veins standing like fine cords beneath the skin. "That looks like it hurts," I said gently. "May I look?" "Yes," he said. The vowels were rounded by the valley. He didn't flinch when I took his hand in mine. The splinter was a long, pale, stubborn guest, and the skin around it had tightened. "I tried to take it out," he said. "But my eyes, not as sharp as when I was a boy." He smiled, and a warmth moved through me like a small, steady light. "We'll make a plan," I said, my voice low, calm, the way I speak in exam rooms when a little boy is afraid of stitches, or a granddaughter needs the confidence to ask about her grandmother's medicines. "Warm water first. Then we'll see if it wants to come out with some coaxing. If not, I have tools." He nodded. We found a basin near the well pump, and I rolled my sleeves. I asked for water as warm as he could comfortably stand. He stood with me while the steam curled up, his eyes on the basin like a man watching a stream where trout might surface. I held his hand as if it were the most important thing in the world. And in that quiet farmyard, it was. The wood released after a few minutes, the skin loosening, the edges of the splinter winking up at me. I used tweezers, steady and sure, and drew it out in one piece. He let out a breath, the kind of exhale that belongs at the end of a prayer. I cleaned the wound with gentle strokes and a little antiseptic I brought, warning him when it might sting. He watched my face, not afraid, but attentive, as if there was something to learn there too. I told him about keeping it clean. I told him what signs to watch for: heat, swelling, streaking. I told him to rest it if he could. He gave me a look that said rest and raising a barn are not words that usually travel together, and we both smiled. "Thank you," he said. His voice had that steady heat again. "I'm Eli. Daniel," I said. "I'll be at the clinic in town for a few days if it gives you trouble." He nodded. "The clinic by the dairy?" he asked. "Yes. Lower side of town." "I know it." He flexed his hand, then lifted his eyes. For a heartbeat, everything got quiet in that way a field goes quiet before rain. His eyes were the color of a sky that has learned patience. Something in me recognized something in him, and that recognition went straight to the place in me that had longed for a kind of peace I hadn't had a name for. I drove back to the clinic with his voice in my ears. I sipped coffee that tasted like a decision, and I completed notes that felt like the gentle closing of doors. Later that afternoon, a grandmother came in with a cough that had settled in her chest. I listened to the music of her lungs with my stethoscope, took her hand, and talked about hydration and rest. A child cried when I looked in his ear, and I talked him through 3 breaths to slower tears. My mind kept returning to a farm lane, to warm water and a careful hand, to a man named Eli who watched me like he was listening to an old song. 2 mornings later, I saw him again. I was driving out to do a home visit at the edge of town. One of the elders had a fever that made the family uneasy. The sky was a soft wool, the kind that tempts you to make a pot of soup. The general store's porch was busy with morning talk. Eli was there with a sack of flour on his shoulder. He saw me and a small light crossed his face. He set the sack down and stepped into the yard, then hesitated, as if crossing from one world to another required a kind of permission. I stopped and rolled down the window. "How's your hand?" I asked. "Better," he said. "It wants to heal." He lifted it. The bandage was clean. "The elder you go to see, is it Mr. King?" "It is. You know him?" He nodded. "Everyone does." "Would you show me the way?" I asked. "You probably know the roads better than my phone does." He smiled, looking at my phone like it was a curious bird, then climbed into the passenger seat with the careful grace of someone taught to respect other people's things. He smelled of cedar shavings and soap. We rode with the windows cracked, the air cool and kind. He pointed me down a gravel path I might have missed otherwise. He didn't say much, but when he did, the words came like clean water. When we reached Mr. King's house, he waited on the porch while I went inside with the family's blessing. Mr. King's fever was a straightforward thing, a battle his body was ready to win with a little help. I explained the plan: rest, fluids, an antibiotic, the watchful eyes of family. When I stepped out again, Eli was still on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking at the shape of the distant hills. "How is he?" he asked. "Recovering," I said. "He has good people watching him." He nodded. Good people help the medicine. I thought of how his hand had rested in my palm 2 days before. I thought of my own heart and how it had been resting and wanting for years. My life in Philadelphia was full and by all the measures I had used for years, good. I saw patients I cherished. I had colleagues I respected. I cooked simple, warm meals in a small apartment with windows that held the afternoon sun like a promise. I had loved before, in ways that taught me tenderness, and in ways that taught me when to let go. But nothing had felt like this. This steadiness, this quiet, this sense that the space between our words was as full and important as the words themselves. We walked together to the car. I offered him a ride back to the store, and he shook his head. "I'll walk," he said. "It's not far." He paused, then added, "Thank you, Daniel." He said my name as if it were something with edges he could shape in his hands. For the elder. For my hand, "You're welcome," I said. The words felt small for what was already unrolling inside me. "I'm around for the week." He nodded, then started down the lane, his stride easy, his hat tilted to shade his eyes. I watched until he turned the corner and disappeared behind a maple that had been standing there. I imagined since before either of us were born. I told myself a story then. The kind you tell a patient who has come to you with a pain no scan can see. Let's watch it, I told myself. Let's see what happens. Let's not force anything. Let's not run ahead. The best healing is unhurried. Over the next days, I saw him in small places like the way a bird you notice once keeps appearing as you move through a wood. He was at the market with baskets he had woven, the kind of baskets that hold apples without complaint. He didn't sell with words. He stood next to his work, and his work spoke for itself. He came by the clinic to pick up herbal salves for his mother, and he stood in the doorway like a tall question mark that wasn't sure if it was allowed to step into a room with fluorescent lights and posters about blood pressure. I told him we were neighbors. He smiled like that was true. Once I found him by the creek that ran behind the clinic. He had paused on a flat rock, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders easy. The water moved in a language that didn't need translation. He turned when he heard my footsteps and made space next to him on the rock without words. "Do you come here when it's hard?" I asked, my voice a little more open than it would have been a week before. "I come here when it's easy," he said. "It reminds me to keep it simple when it's hard." We stood in the kind of silence that is its own river. His sleeve brushed mine once. It was the smallest touch, and yet it changed the temperature of the air around us. He didn't move away. Neither did I. He told me about a colt he was breaking to harness, about the way a skittish animal needs patience more than force. I told him about a boy in the clinic who was afraid of blood draws and how we got through it with a story about a brave knight and a dragon who liked marshmallows. We laughed together like we had been laughing for years. I thought about telling him then that I liked men. I thought about how to say it without making it a test or a trap. A doctor learns to let truth arrive when it's ready, to ask questions and then thank a person even when their answer isn't the one that would make your job easier or your heart lighter. I didn't say it. I didn't say anything more than, "I like this creek," and he said, "Me too," and that was enough for that day. The week ended as weeks do, whether you feel ready or not. I drove back to Philadelphia on Sunday evening, the sky a stitched quilt of pink and gold. My hands felt too empty on the steering wheel. The city welcomed me with noise and lights and the busy kindness of a place where everything is happening all at once. I returned to my routines. Morning runs when the streets were still half asleep, coffee brewed slow, patients whose faces I knew well. But in quiet moments, between one patient and the next, in the aisle with the fresh bread at the market, at my sink with my sleeves rolled up, I saw a porch with an old wood rail, a creek, a field with long shadows. A man with patient eyes, I told myself, be kind to this feeling. Don't make it prove itself. If it is real, it will be there in a month. If it is a story you're telling yourself because your heart is lonely, it will fade like chalk in rain. It did not fade. 3 weeks later, the clinic called. Could I cover again for a weekend? A stomach bug had swept their staff. I said yes before the nurse had finished the sentence. On Friday evening, I drove up again. A bag with clothes and a bag with stethoscope and otoscope and a roll of gauze and a little hope I didn't know how to pack. The air smelled like leaf smoke. At the edge of town, I passed a small auction. People stood under strings of lights that bobbed in the breeze. There were pies in boxes and quilts folded like sleeping children. I circled back like a moth. He was there, holding a box of candle holders he had made. He saw me, and that same small light touched his face. We didn't move toward each other like people in films. We respected the space and the people in it. We stepped into the same aisle and stood a breath closer than two men who are strangers might stand. "You're back," he said. "I am," I said. "I'm here for a few days." He nodded, his eyes flicking to the box under my arm. "You buying a quilt?" "Maybe," I said. "I'm buying a story I can wrap around my shoulders when it's cold." He laughed, and a woman 2 booths over looked at us and smiled at our laughter without knowing why. "Would you walk?" He asked later, when the pie auction had ended, and the air was tipping toward cold in a way that felt like a warning and a blessing. We took a gravel lane behind the dairy. He didn't touch me, and I didn't touch him, but the space between us was charged like a lightning field. There was the creak of leather harness in the distance, the soft chuff of a horse. The moon was a thin bowl tipped over, spilling a quiet light across the road. "I don't know your rules," he said. "Neither do I," I said. "I only know mine," he breathed out. "And your rules?" he asked. "Be kind. Tell the truth. Don't make someone else hold your fear. If you love someone, you don't make them choose between you and their oxygen." He nodded, looking at the road, stones catching glints. "I have never told some truths," he said. He said it like a man who knows exactly where his truths are kept and why he keeps them there. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Not a confession. Not a story that is too heavy to say out loud." He stopped walking. I stopped too. He lifted his head, and in that moment, it felt like anybody watching from a window would have thought we were talking about weather. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I think about a man, the way other men talk about a woman in spring." He swallowed. "The first time I thought it, I was young. I put it away like I had put away a sharp tool. I learned to work without it. My work is good. My life is good. I did not feel lonely until I met you." The wind moved across the field like the hand of a mother smoothing a boy's hair. I didn't reach for him right away. I let the truth stand between us and become a thing with weight and shape. I took a breath that went all the way down. "I am a gay man," I said. "And I have learned to say those words like I say I am a doctor or I am in line at the post office, often and without apology. But with you, I feel a reverence that asks me to speak more slowly. He closed his eyes, then opened them. He stepped so close that our shoulders touched. Our hands did not then. He was brave and afraid in the same breath. We stood like that until the cold went from suggestion to fact. I don't know what comes next, he said. We are not required to know, I answered. We are only required to be honest and gentle. The next day, work filled my hours the way water fills a cup. People came in with stomach aches and stiff backs, and the small, repeated worries that make life hard until someone names them and gives you a plan. In the quiet between patients, Eli appeared like a tall kind of grace. He stood at my door once and tipped his hat, shy in a way I had not seen before. He brought warm bread wrapped in cloth and told me to eat. He waited on the porch while I did, his hands folded. I stepped outside with him and we ate together like two people who had found a table that would hold us both. He told me about his passel of nieces and nephews. I told him about a sister in Minnesota who makes quilts that look like winter lights. We did not say the word love. We did not need to. It was like a creek under ice, moving steady and invisible. In the evening, I drove by his farm. The barn that we had stood by weeks before held a new beam, raw and bright. His mother waved from the porch. She had that strong, clear look that women get when they have done hard things and then stood up to do another. She welcomed me without questions. He talks about the doctor who uses simple words, she said, pouring coffee that steamed like small prayers. Says you talk like someone who has sat with old people long enough to learn what matters. I told her I had. It is an honor to be with people when their bodies are tired and their souls are a room with all the windows open. Eli came in with wood, and his father looked at him with love that was also expectation and tradition and 100 unwritten rules. Families are their own dictionaries. I had been cold for a long time, in a way that is easy to overlook when you have a good coat and a warm apartment and friends who will bring soup when you are sick. Eli felt like sun after a winter that had gone on too long. He felt like a hand on a fevered head. He felt like a diagnosis that explains the symptoms you have been careful not to list out loud. He showed me his workshop before I left. It was a small building that smelled like cardamom and wood dust. In a corner, a set of candle holders caught the light like small ships. He ran his fingers over a tabletop he was finishing for a neighbor. His hands were sure and gentle. He showed me the place where he cuts dovetails and said, "It is about patience and pressure and knowing when to stop." I thought about the small bones of the hand, the way skin closes itself if you give it time, the way a good conversation ends before it frays. When we stood in the doorway, the daylight almost gone, he reached for my wrist as if checking my pulse. He didn't. He let his fingers hover, then he stepped back. "I will be at the creek tomorrow night," he said, his eyes on my face as if he were listening for a yes that my mouth wasn't quite ready to form. "At dusk. I'll be there," I said. The creek held the moon and us the next evening. We stood low in the grass where the bugs sang like a choir. I moved closer. He did too. "May I?" I asked, and lifted my hand so he could see it before I moved at all. He nodded. I touched his cheek with 3 fingers like a blessing. He closed his eyes, and I felt the way his breath changed against my palm. I leaned in and kissed him the way I would bandage a wound I wanted very much to heal. Not too tight, not too loose, not demanding, but with the kind of care that says, "You can trust this." He kissed me back. His mouth tasted like October. I have known many kinds of clarity in my life. The clarity of a diagnosis that fits, the clarity of a sunrise after a long night in the ER, the clarity of knowing that a friend is your friend for life. This was its own kind. We fit into the world without making a sound I needed to apologize for. After that night, the hours bent themselves around our meetings. We were careful in a way that honored where he came from and who he was. We did not walk arm in arm through town. We learned the shape of each other's day and the places it was possible to slip in and out without asking the rest of the world to clap for us. I drove back to the city and then up to the farm and then back again, my heart learning the route as well as my car did. In between, we wrote letters. A Mennonite woman named Miriam, who ran the dry goods counter, agreed to be our mailbox. She didn't ask questions. She would simply put an envelope in my hand and say, "For you," and there would be a small warmth in her eyes that told me she understood enough. His letters were like him, clean-lined, quiet, and somehow more than they said. He would tell me about the weather in a way that let me see the trees and feel the ache in his shoulders after a long day. He would talk about sanding and how it requires the kind of patience that becomes its own prayer. He would tell me about a new foal born before dawn. He would tell me about a hymn sung so soft it felt like cotton. On the back of one letter, he had sketched the creek. I sent him pages about my days, patients whose blood pressure numbers melted like worry in warm water, a joke a nurse told in the break room, and I tucked in small things that I could, a leaf pressed flat between pages, a recipe card from my grandmother for apple cake in my careful handwriting. Sometimes I would tell him about a night in the ER when the world arrived in pain and left breathing easier, and I would say, I want that for us. Someone arriving with us in pain and leaving breathing easier. Humans have a way of testing whatever is gentle, as if to see whether it will break. Life did its part. In late winter, his father fell, slipping on ice as clear as glass. A hip fracture is a small earthquake in a family. I drove up as ice fell in bright razor-thin discs from the branches. I found them in the kitchen, Eli's mother's face, a careful map of worry and determination. We got the ambulance there, slow and steady, a decision that required diplomacy and love. In the hospital, I spoke to the surgeon as Eli stood at the window staring out at a sky that looked like an old bruise. I put my hand on the small of his back. He didn't move away. He closed his eyes and leaned back, the smallest amount, as if the support could be borrowed without a receipt. His father's surgery was straightforward. One of those procedures modern medicine does so well that it seems ordinary until it is your father's bones we are rearranging. He recovered with the tenacity of a man who has turned earth with his hands. Eli thanked me more times than were necessary. "You were our bridge," his mother said, and the word went into my pocket like a stone to hold and warm. In the quiet after the crisis, truth came out of Eli like breath after being held too long. We were in the barn, the smell of hay the same as it is in 1,000 barns across the country and completely its own. He said, "Sometimes I want to stand on the road with my hands up and ask the world to stop. I want to tell it I need time to choose. I want to keep my people and stand next to you like the truth we are. I want to ask the Lord why he would give me two loves and one body that can't be in two places at once." His voice did not break. It did something better. It kept going. "And then I touch wood, and it steadies me." "Love is not a verdict," I said. "It is a vital sign. We check it like we check pulse and temperature. We notice when it's high because we just ran and that's okay. We notice when it's low because we are cold and we need a blanket. We don't call it wrong. We respond." He looked at me like I had handed him an apple he didn't know he wanted. He stepped close and wrapped his arms around me in a long hug that warmed my back through my coat. "You talk like you fix chairs with words," he said into my shoulder, and I laughed even as my eyes were wet. We did not rush any decision. We did not tear stitches that were trying very hard to hold. He did not leave one day in anger to wake up in another life blinking and raw. Instead, we did what people do when they are choosing something big and know they cannot undo it. We sat with it. We spoke to the people who had earned the right to hear our hearts. Miriam, who told us nothing we felt was a surprise to God. An uncle of his who had been a quiet boy once and had learned to carry gentleness like an axe that cuts wood without shattering it. My sister on the phone who said she had never heard me sound so much like myself. The first time we kissed in daylight, a dog barked and then went quiet. It was on the back step of his shop, a small square of earth that had seen more sawdust than feet. He kissed me with a clarity that made every other kiss in my life a preface to this paragraph. When we pulled back, he pressed his forehead to mine and said, "I have never felt clean inside while doing something everyone told me would dirty me." And I understood that I had been waiting my whole life to hear those words. He did not leave that month. He did not leave the next. Spring came soft as a child on tiptoes. Fields turned the new green that looks almost like a memory before it becomes a fact. We planted tomatoes in my city garden, and I taught him the trick of pinching the suckers so the plant's energy could go to fruit. He taught me how to braid garlic, our hands making an old rhythm new. He laughed at my electric drill with more drill bits than I needed. I marveled at his ability to judge a board by the way it sang when he tapped it. On a Friday in June, he called me from a payphone at the edge of town. He had found a way to stand at that booth without being seen by anyone he did not want to talk to. His voice shook, not with fear, but with the kind of vibration a string makes when it has been pulled taut for too long. "My world is asking me to pick," he said. "They are not unkind. They are trying to save me the trouble, maybe, but the net feels like rope around my chest. I can't breathe easy anymore when I sit at my table. If I'm going to jump, I want to do it where I can see the river." "I will not push you," I said. "I will wait in the water with a towel." He laughed, a surprised short sound. "I know," he said. "That is the problem and the blessing." 2 weeks later, he showed up at my door with a small bag and a face like a morning after a storm. He stood there, hat in hand, the city's noise pushing against his back. He looked at me like a man who had come to a river he has loved in maps and now must learn its current with his body. "I told them I needed to listen to the Lord," he said. My mother cried like a roof with a leak. My father looked at the ground a long time. He did not say a hard word. He did not say much at all. My sister put bread in my hands. "If I go back tomorrow, I am still their son. If I go back in a year, I am still their son. I don't know what the church will do to my place. I know what they can't touch." "What's that?" I whispered. "This," he said, and he stepped in and put his hand to my chest like he was checking whether a story was true. "This is the part that belongs to the Lord." I stepped aside. He stepped in. The apartment smelled like basil and hope. We placed his bag by the door and we did not rush. We made tea, we sat. We let our hearts slow down, like patience after a hard walk. We made a list of gentle tasks, because that is what you do when you are overwhelmed and want to keep your head above water. Find anchors. Tomorrow we would go get him a second shirt. We would find a map. We would stand in the grocery aisle and smile like boys at the variety of bread. We would breathe. He stayed. He learned the city's music in small measures. He was generous with himself in the ways that matter and careful in the ways that avoid harm. He did not throw away his hat. He hung it by the door. He found carpentry work with a man in South Philly who looked at his dovetails and said, "You're hired," before he knew he was saying it. He kept Sabbath in his bones even when the clocks around us did not, and I found that I wanted to match his rest with my own. We ate simple suppers at our small table. We walked by the river in the evenings. When he felt lost, he would pick up a board and plan a box without cutting it, and the lines he drew with his pencil would steady him until he could sleep. When I came home late from the hospital, he would hand me a glass of water and touch my cheek with 2 fingers. Some nights we would both be too tired to say anything wise, and we would sit on the couch with the dog we adopted from a shelter, a good-minded mutt we named Maple, leaning against Eli's calf like he had always belonged there. He missed home. Missing is not a disease you cure. It is a companion you learn to invite in for tea. He taught me how to live with it. I taught him how to find the quiet inside a city. He taught me how to make coffee with patience. I taught him how to read a bus map and how to listen to the small beep that tells you your fare has been accepted. He showed me how to sand in circles, small and even. I showed him where the best apples are on the vendor's table, the ones near the back, the ones still a little cool from the crate. We did not stop being afraid of some things. We learned we didn't need to. We learned to name our fears like neighbors we wave at but don't invite in for dinner. We learned to laugh more. We learned to speak without whispering, and to whisper when the moment was a bowl too shallow for loud voices. I learned that love can feel like taking a pulse and hearing it strong and saying, "Good, keep doing what you're doing." Months became seasons. We built a life that didn't need defending. He made a bookshelf that our landlord asked to buy when he saw it by accident. We said no, and then said yes when we needed the money, and then we laughed as we watched the landlord try to carry it up the stairs. Eli started going to a little church with a simple service in a storefront, where people sang out of tune but with earnest hearts. They did not ask him to explain himself to be welcomed. I stood beside him sometimes, holding the melody like a line we could walk. We found a circle of friends who didn't care where our chairs had come from, only that we were in them. One autumn, we drove back to Lancaster to help after a flood. The creek we had loved had swelled and stepped over its banks and moved furniture it had never intended to hold. We showed up with gloves and drills and a cooler full of sandwiches. The men looked at him and then at me, their eyes tired from hauling. No one asked for papers or a plan for the rest of our life. We carried wet carpet out into the sun. We dragged a soaked mattress that dripped like rain. His mother came to the porch with a pan of cinnamon rolls, the kind that make even bad news sit down and listen. She looked at the way I picked up a box at the same time as her son, how our hands found the same rhythm. She looked at me and said, "You have been eating," the way mothers say it when they mean something much more than that. I nodded. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She pressed a roll into my hand, and I ate it like sacrament. His father watched us over the rim of his coffee mug. He is a man whose words are as valuable as coins, and he doesn't spend them lightly. He set the mug down and said, "Eli always had a straight back." He looked at the water line on the wall like a wound that had already begun to heal. He said, "Some things get carried away. Some things you carry with you. Be sure you know which is which." He didn't mention shunning. He didn't mention church rules. He didn't need to say more. He had said what he could say. We went back to the city with mud still on our boots and cinnamon in our teeth and a kind of peace that made the air feel more oxygenated somehow. We didn't run from what we loved. We learned to run toward it. We built a small bench and placed it by our building's door, and sometimes in the evening neighbors would sit on it and talk. We planted herbs in a window box and let them be slightly messy because neatness is not the same as goodness. We wrote new letters. We received a few. We accepted some silences as their own kind of letter. Years teach you what kind of love you have. Some love is dramatic, all storms and declarations. Ours was a road where you can hear your own thoughts and your companion's steps and know you do not have to walk faster than your legs want to move. We grew older in the small ways people do. New lines around the eyes that come from laughter more than worry, a lower tolerance for shoes that hurt your feet, a greater appreciation for naps. I had a scare one winter, a chest pain that turned out to be small and manageable, an electrical miscommunication that my cardiologist smiled at and set right with a kind of elegant math. Eli was calm in all the right ways and fierce in the ones that mattered. He made sure I ate, made me tea, told me stories about the first time he made a dovetail that looked like a dog's ear. We sat with my hand over his heart, and we let our bodies teach us that we were safe. We never left our beginnings behind. The creek showed up in my dreams and in the pictures he sketched on the envelopes of bills we had to pay. The porch with the softwood rail returned in the way we leaned into each other's sides when we watched the weather on the news. The barn raising came back in the way we asked our friends for help and offered help without making a fuss when a couch had to be moved or a baby watched or a bad day sat heavy. People sometimes ask me how we managed the differences. And I tell them it is like when a patient tells me she is afraid of taking medicine she needs. You start with respect. You listen to what the fear is trying to protect. You avoid pushing. You ask for permission before you touch a tender spot. You set a schedule you can keep. You make adjustments when a plan that sounded good in the office doesn't work in the kitchen. You bless the progress you can measure, and you bless the progress you cannot see yet because it is happening under the skin. I don't think I will ever forget the moment that gave our story its title. The moment I realized that Eli was the Amish man I couldn't forget, not because he was Amish, but because he was Eli. We were in the grocery store, standing in the aisle with the pickles. There are more pickles in a city grocery than make any kind of sense. He picked up a jar and read the label like it was letter from a friend who uses too many adjectives. He set it down and picked up another, then laughed quietly. "What?" I asked. "When I was a boy," he said, "we had two kinds of pickles. Now look at this. Bread and butter, kosher dill, sweet heat, spears, chips, holes. One is called Old World Crunch." He looked up at me then, his smile both surprised and a little sad. I am in a place where I can choose almost anything. But the choice that mattered most to me was simple. It was you. I touched his sleeve, right where the seam lay. "You are the first person I have loved who made my breathing easier instead of harder," I said, very softly. He nodded, our eyes wet, and in that grocery aisle that smelled faintly of vinegar and lemon soap, we stood in a circle of ordinary grace. Some stories ask to end with a wedding, a ring, a song that friends know the words to. We did stand under a big tree with people we loved, a summer afternoon sweet with grass and bees. We said words to each other that we meant so much we spoke them like an oath and a lullaby at once. A friend read a poem that had no capital letters and still felt like a cathedral. And a neighbor sang in a voice that would not win contests and made everyone's heart feel like a window someone had opened. There were no tuxedos, only the best version of who we are. His mother came and stood at the edge of the crowd. She held a handkerchief in both hands like a small sail. When we walked by, she put her hand on my cheek and I kissed it. His father came late, as if he had followed the sound of our voices without wanting to admit he had meant to. He nodded at us like men do when words would spill if they were allowed out of their cage. That was enough. More than enough. We went home that evening to a kitchen that smelled like sliced peaches and sun on wood floor. We sat with our shoes off and our legs touching from knee to ankle. The dog sighed 3 times, the way she does when even joy feels like a lot of work. Eli put his head on my shoulder and said, "You fixed a lot of folks today, doctor." And I laughed in that way you do when someone you love gives you back your name with a new shine. I am a doctor. I am a man who loves men. I am a neighbor and a son and a partner and a person who knows how to take a splinter out in a way that makes the world feel slightly more merciful. Eli is a farmer who became a city carpenter who still pauses when he hears a horse's hooves on a street because his body knows that sound like it knows his own heartbeat. He is a man who built a life out of careful cuts and patient sanding, and a truth that once it arrived refused to be put back into the drawer with the sharp tools. Together, we are 2 people who learn to tell the truth as if our lungs depended on it. Together, we learn to move slowly enough to feel what we feel. If you are listening to this and holding your breath because you are afraid of what your love might cost you, I will tell you what I tell a patient who is too scared to swallow a pill they need. Take a small sip, not a gulp. Let your throat know it is safe. Tomorrow, take a bigger sip. Find someone who will sit with you and hold the glass and not make you hurry. There is no prize for finishing first. There is only the gift of finishing at all, of standing at your own sink with the water running over your hands and thinking, "I did it. I told the truth. I am breathing easier. I still go back to the clinic sometimes. The roads are the same. The corn rises on schedule, generous as ever. The creek still moves like a quiet line of song. I park at the edge of a lane and carry my bag and the steady weight of years. Sometimes I see Eli's family. Sometimes I don't. The place is in me either way. When I drive home, I call out the places as if they are old friends. There's the bend where the maple leans. There's the fence with the yarn looped over it that someone used to fix a hole because that was what they had that day. I fold those sights into the pocket where I keep the letters, the first kiss, the words he said about feeling clean. I am a man who remembered an Amish man he could not forget. And now I am a man who wakes up with that man's hand on his chest, steady as a good pulse. On evenings when the light leans gold through our windows, he sometimes stands with a plane, long curls of wood falling to the floor like a lesson in patience. I sit with my notes, a list of people I have promised to call tomorrow. I watch the way his shoulders move like a prayer. He looks up and catches me looking and smiles that small smile that changes the weather. We make dinner, we eat. We wash dishes by hand when we feel like it. We let them air dry when we don't. We go to bed. And when I wake in the middle of the night, as doctors often do, cataloging symptoms and worries, and which of my patients needs me next, he slides his hand over my heart and waits with me, the way I held his hand over that basin the first day I knew his name. The world will be the world. People will say too much and not enough. The creek will keep moving. We will keep choosing each other in small and sturdy ways. And in the morning, I will go out into the city with my stethoscope and my coffee and a heart that knows what it is for. And he will head to his workshop with a pencil behind his ear. And we will meet back at our table like 2 men who found their way home and decided to stay.